All right, so forget Rip Jen. He didn't step up to the plate like he said he would, but you know who kind of just sort of popped right up there, don't ya know? That good old Linus Tech Tips, LTT. But big asterisks, big star next to his name. Splave, who is a very high ranking XOC guy that's been around for several generations of GPUs now, also has his own SI company and builds computers, and you can buy a computer from him that's already like factory overclocked to the balls and stuff. But he showed up with his own card that was modded. So the whole LTT Labs thing that's on there, that's Splave. Splave did that. And Linus just stuck it in his big environmental chamber that like chilled it down or whatever. But this isn't so much about trying to beat Linus. I'll explain why in a second. But first, we gotta plug merch because I gotta help pay for this shit. Today's video is brought to you by our brand new GPU Apocalypse 2.0 shirt, kind of immortalizing all of the stuff you love about today's GPUs. Our GPU Apocalypse 1.0 shirt was actually one of our most famous and popular shirts, and now it's re-immortalized with GPU 2.0. But let's face it, the Apocalypse never went anywhere, it just evolved. Just like this shirt. Go buy it now. So you can also say fuck fake frames by getting your own no bullshit shirt. We'll call it now. It's all the GPU bullshit rolled into one shirt. Anyway, moving on. There's something that was mentioned at the end of that video that really kind of had me wondering for a bit there, is all of the XOC guys have moved back over to Intel. So he stated...
So you don't think that giving the CPU anymore will get us any more score?
Probably not. Intel actually scores a lot higher on this 1400 series for some reason.
Oh. Well,
Like,
darn.
What if you would probably won first? Sorry.
So by going from a 9800 X3D / 9950 X3D back to like a 14900 KS, apparently can lift the score as much as 1,000 points. Now there's a lot of like caveats to that. Obviously you have to be pushing enough frames for it to matter, which clearly we are not. But I want to basically build a dedicated XOC system right now because I'm doing myself a disservice by trying to use our GPU test bench because it has a very specific configuration on there that has to get moved around and changed every time we do the XOC stuff. And if we want to keep our results as consistent as possible, we should not be intermixing these types of tests and stuff. So I'm gonna build today an XOC rig because right now this is about as much fun as we can have with these GPUs and such because everything is just kind of such a clusterfuck in the world that let's just call this GPU drag racing now at this point, and it's a lot of fun. We enjoy doing this. Now today I'm using my Aorus Master 5090. This card is not as fast as an Astral when it comes to overclocking an XOC. I don't know necessarily why. I think it's just, so for whatever reason, and it's not temperature related, because this thing maxes out with my overclock that's over 3000 megahertz at 58C. That's not hot at all, especially since I don't have an AC or anything hooked up to it. And that does include adding the rear fan on there as well, which is this guy over here, which is a very janky way of doing it, but it just goes right there and adds more pressure through the cooler. It's just got very inconsistent frequencies. Like it goes all over the place, up and down, whereas the Astral cards have always been very consistent, and getting those lows higher is what we need to do to get the score higher. But I can still test the theory that moving from an 9800 X3D back to a 14900 KS, I've never owned a KS or any SKU, by the way. This is the first one I bought it. Since they don't make them anymore technically, ever since the Intel problems popped up. This was actually very expensive. It was $698 for this. And the crazy part is when they initially sold these, they advertised them as up to 6.2 gigahertz. They're now advertised as up to 5.7 gigahertz because don't forget with the new microcode and the BIOSes and all that, they had to drop the power limits, which means they also had to drop the clocks because of stability. So now the KS is technically slower than the standard K was at 5.8. But obviously we're gonna be overclocking it. So I'm just trying to mimic what's on the leaderboard because if you look at the screenshot, you'll see there is an awful lot of Intel back on there. OGS, got a 14900 KF. Team Russia, 14900 KF. If we look at Splave, 14900 KS. Number 5, NVIDIA Fan is running a 14900K. Phantom is running a 14900 KS. Motive Man is running a 13900 KS. So there's a clear shift for the XOC guys back to Intel. And I think because once they're getting up to these ridiculously high average frame rates, well over 200 average FPS, the X3D, both the 9950 X3D and the 9800 X3D kind of cap out around that 5.4, maybe 5.5 gigahertz if you're lucky. I am not lucky. I have another 9800 X3D I never tested because it doesn't matter because we're not using that rig anymore. Mine won't go above 5.3 all-core and be stable. So we're stuck at 5.3. But I think Steve was getting 5.5 on his 9800 X3D, which at this point means that we're giving ourselves a major clock disadvantage simply because of the fact that the cache can only make up for so much. That's why the slower cores of the X3Ds, like the let's say 7800 X3D versus a 7600 X3D, is a major difference, not just because of the core count, but also the clock is down. So right now we're trying to brute force with higher clocks on the CPU to make up for the lack of cache and the fact that we can, on average, run faster RAM. So I've got the 14900 KS. I've got this G.Skill XMP 3.0 ready. It is a 8000 megahertz kit, 16 gigs times 2, CL38. Now the timings are not as tight as I would like. CL38, 48, 48, 128. That 128 I'm a little concerned with. But RAM's easy to play with, and we're just gonna find the fastest RAM that we could possibly get matched up with this rig. Hopefully our 14900 KS is a little bit of a lottery winner, allowing us to be able to run over 6 gigahertz on the CPU, because you'll notice all the guys that are on the leaderboard with their 1400 KFs are running 6 plus. So obviously we're gonna need more cooler than we have here. I'm gonna be running the Liquid Freezer 3 420 because it's the biggest AIO I have for this. And we are going to be getting rid of this Unify X system on here. This is actually Core Ultra. This is a Core Ultra 9 system right here. And we know Core Ultra right now is not up to the task of the XOC stuff. The PMD2, we don't need this at all. In fact, it'll just be screaming at us once we start adding our voltage mods and BIOS mods and stuff to hopefully a new Astral card. But yeah, we need to build this. So I should have done this a long time ago and we're finally doing it today. Okay, so as you can see, we clearly picked up some size for our CPU for obvious reasons, because we are gonna have to overclock it. So I'm using the Asus Maximus Z790 Dark Hero because it's one of the only Z790 boards that I still have actually. And I know the Asus BIOS very well. The RAM, let's talk about that. So I talked about the timings and such. So if we look at the calculator for RAM timing of what's on there now, which is the 6000 megahertz CL28, it's actually CL28 36 36 96. This is 8000 38 48 48 128. So the subtimings of the 48 48 128 have nanoseconds of 12 12 and 32. So does the 36 36 96. That's also 12 12 32. So those numbers are a wash. I'm not worried about them not being comparable. The nanosecond latency on the 6000 CL28 is 9.3. This is 9.5. So although it is 0.2 slower, that if it will run at 8000, I really hope it will. I think we're going to be better off with this RAM because of the fact that we're going to have a much wider bus of memory well, not bus, but we have a much higher mega transfer at 8000 versus 6000, right? So that is what, 33% more mega transfers versus the, right? Because yeah, 246, 246, yeah. So we have 33% more mega transfers. I did 5 runs with this card on the 9800 X3D, and our average across 5 runs was a 39,473.5. So we'll just call it a 39,474, right? If we are anywhere in that ballpark, then that tells me this setup is not going to really show its benefit until we really start pushing the frames higher. But either way, it was important to have a dedicated XOC rig. And you know, when you see the guys that are literally the fastest in the world using a certain type of setup, Well, you kind of got to mimic that. So I got to get it over there. I got to get Windows installed on it. I got to get the drivers updated. I got to get Windows updated. And then I've got to get 3D Mark installed. I am running the standalone version, by the way. I want to mention that. I switched to the standalone instead of Steam. Scores were the same, to be honest, so it didn't benefit me in any way, but at least it's nice not to have to launch Steam every time. Now, obviously the RGB is enabled for speed, including on this guy right here. Ow, I forgot it's still turning. There's a fan in there. My pinky went in there. Anyway, so I like using the Freezer 3 AIO because it's got this downfire fan that will help cool the VRMs. In my BIOS setting, I actually have removed all of the limits. So I undid all the Intel fixes for this one. And then I am letting the AI overclocker do its thing. So it's actually pushing my core to 6.3. And I am getting 6.3 gigahertz in single core on 4 different cores. I've also gone in and adjusted my power profile to make sure that we're running it at full speed as much as possible. The RAM is running 8,000. That self-enabled. I didn't... That's Phil's also experienced with his system, just putting in different RAM and having XMP turn itself on. This system has not been booted. So anyway, got my GPU mounted here. I've got my GPU control software going to make the fans go 100%. We're pretty set up. I've got my drive in there. It's a single drive. The only thing on there is 3D Mark and Cinebench because I had to do some temperature testing on the GPU or the CPU. CPU does hit 95C in all core. But I haven't done any voltage tuning. It's just ASUS probably cranking that voltage up, which means I'm probably gonna wanna go in there and at least verify some voltage tuning so that I can keep the voltage as low as possible and still be stable. That'll take some time, that won't be today. Updates are done in the system. Some of my tweaks for Windows have been done to try and make it more lightweight. Not much else to talk about here, other than the fans are set to 100% on all of it, as you can tell. So there's that. I'm gonna just go ahead and do one run right now with you guys on camera, and then I'll do my 5-run average and we'll see if we gained anything. I'm genuinely curious if I'm gonna notice any difference right now at these speeds, considering these speeds are a good 6,000 points lower than the top 5. So, could not move files. Restart 3D Mark and try again. Okay, whatever. I mean, it's a fresh install. Why are we getting this shit? Okay, actually, before we do that, I did notice that right at the start of the test, I was actually getting 10 FPS lower than I normally would get on the 9800X3D. So the 9800X3D with this graphics card with the exact same overclock settings as over there, I would start the test at about 170, 171 FPS. And that's actually still pretty low because with the overclocked not LN2, but ice-watered Astral, we were in the 180s. So it tells you how much of a drop this card is versus the Astral with the cooling tweaks. Anyway, I digress. It was 10 FPS lower. I was at like 160, 161, and then dropping into the 150s. First thing I noticed was like, wait a minute. I went into the BIOS to just double check that the PCI Express was set to Gen 5 and all that, but I noticed I was getting 8x bandwidth or bus width, which you guys might have noticed by me putting the top slot right there for my system drive and forgetting that this is a 14th gen setup, not like a Core Ultra or the new AM5 stuff where there's lots and lots of Gen 5 PCIe lanes, and there being less PCIe lanes on Intel than AMD. By having any drive in that top slot basically cuts our top 16x PCI Express or full-size PCI Express down to 8. Now, in games, like normal gaming scenario, this would actually not be that noticeable. But because of the fact that our CPU is not doing a whole lot in this test, we just have to keep the frequency as high as possible for the RAM to lift up some of the tests. Believe it or not, the RAM helps a lot when it comes to 3D Mark. But in this particular instance, we are going to notice having less or half the bandwidth available to us when it comes to 3D Mark. So I need to now shut down the system, move the drive to one of the lower slots. I have to pull the heatsink off of it because it's not going to fit under the GPU with the heatsink on. And then that should get our drive off of our direct to CPU when it comes to CPU lanes utilizing the communication between the drive. So our GPU gets all of the PCI Express lanes to the CPU, and then our drive will just go through the PCH. All right, there we go, PCI Express X1650 at X1650. What's funny is it's showing 5.0 kind of locked now, where before it was dropping down to 1.1. So it'll dynamically change depending on the load on the GPU. But what's funny is I'm sitting here in the exact same scenario as I was prior to moving the drive down to the PCH lanes instead of the direct to CPU lanes. And now I'm not seeing the PCI Express fluctuating in terms of its bandwidth, or its gen, if you will. Okay, I've made no other changes to the system. I want to see now if I get that 10 FPS back. I'm gonna be honest, I've tested 14th gen on my other 14th gen rig right here, and I always got an average of lower scores than on 9800 X3D. So it's possible I may not even get a tangible difference or even match the 9800 X3D until we really start pushing the clocks. It's gonna really suck if I spent near $1,000 on putting this hardware together just to have it not matter. So this is where I'm gonna have to just start doing some more research. And the problem is, everyone on the top of the leaderboard is obviously very tight-lipped because they don't want to give away any of their trade secrets, right? That's why we loved working with Kingpin. He told us everything. Unfortunately, Kingpin's removed from all of this now, so he can't really help, especially if we want to start modifying the 5090s, which I'm okay with doing. I need to know where to start. So this is actually quite interesting. So this is way lower than the other system. So the other system, the first run I got was a 39,418, then a 39,511, 39,469, 39,500. Obviously, we're 2,300 points shy of that. But what's interesting about this is the GPU clock is on average much higher than it is over there. It's over 3,000 through the entire run, as you can see right there. But what's interesting here is if you look, the CPU clock has come down under 6 gigs. It's at 5.8 right now. So this tells me the GPU is able to go that high because it's not under the most load. Like, it's not actually hitting 90 or 100% load, which is why the clock can stay up. That tells me we're still bottlenecked. We're still bottlenecked somewhere with this config, and I'm not entirely sure what it is. If I look at the CPU temperature, you can see we maxed out at 54 on the CPU. Or 53, GPU hit all the way to 58, which is the same as getting over there. So I know temperature is not related to any of these differences with the GPU. 58's the max over there, 58's the max over here. So if we take a look at frame rate right here, the peak, this is the part where it's looking down at the ship as it's coming in, only hit 281, but on the other rig, it hits 292. So I'm still having like 10%, or not 10%, but 10 FPS kind of like lower curve across the board. And that tells me because we are getting limited somewhere with either the Windows config, which is the same config on both of these, or the clocks or something. So right now I'm gonna kind of mess around with the CPU a little bit, figure out why I'm not going to the 6.3 all-core, or not all-core, but it's only running a couple of cores on this test. And I'm gonna see what I can do right now to try and pull some efficiency out of here in the BIOS. Just turning on the AI overclocker is probably not good enough for this. So I'm gonna, you know what's so frustrating about this is every time I watch, like I watched Linus's video and I've watched like when Steve and Bearded Hardware did it. I've even watched when some of the like XOC guys do their own videos. They're just like, oh yeah, just install Windows and put the card on there. And look at the score, it's all good. It's like, why does my shit always feel like it's bottlenecked in some way? That's because I know for a fact they're not sharing any of the real tips that matter. Because why would they want to? Because then they'll just have more competition. I'm gonna figure this shit out, I swear to God. Okay, I think starting to dial in on some stuff here. It crashed again, but the leaderboard gives us a lot of clues. So let's look at OGS right here. It's a 1400 KF, 1 processor, 16 logical CPUs. They're disabling the E-cores. So I need to go in and do that now, because that's probably gonna free up some temperature and some voltage availability to our P-cores, so we can probably get an all-core. So let me look at his detailed results real quick. Okay, they're only at 6,000. Which I can already get, but you can see right here, number of cores is 24, but logical processors is 16. So it knows there's 24 cores because that's the CPU that it is, but what's actually being reported there is 1 of 16. So if I look at mine right here, CPU. Right here, I've got sockets 1, cores 24, logical 32. That's just because I have an army of E-cores in a 14.9, and then we have 8 P-cores with hyperthreading. So what they've done is they've disabled all the E-cores. They have 8 P-cores with hyperthreading getting you the 16 logical. So looking down at the rest of everyone else's score, let's look at Team Russia, same thing, 116 with a 14.9. Splave, 116 with a 14.9. NVIDIA Fan, 116 with a 14.9. I think that's where I need to go right now, is I need to go and disable the P-cores, or E-cores, just run them all on E-cores. Disable the E-cores and see what I can get for a clock on this with just a regular ass AIO. Okay, I am mature enough to admit when I don't know what the hell is going on. And I have now matched the settings as best as I can tell. And I'm getting essentially the same exact FPS numbers as prior to disabling the E-cores and pushing the P-core all-core to 6 gigs. And I don't know, I need to see what it's gonna report back to me on what the frequencies and stuff we're doing, but this is still gonna be like a 37,000 something. Yeah, 37, we lost score. We were at like 37,005, now we're at 37,377. This is absolutely ridiculous. Look, our CPU was locked at 6 the entire freaking time. Our GPU is getting amazing clocks at over 3 gigs the entire way, except for that little dip right there. GPU is at 100% the entire time. I don't know what's happening right now. Like, it's acting like the Intel is bottlenecking it. But this is all exactly GPU memory clock. Okay, yeah, that's locked at the 2125. That's plus 3,000 on there right now. CPU temperature, we had a little spike right there at 65. Everything's down in the 50s, and then 65 again. GPU's at just under 58. So again, our GPU temps are normal. CPU clock frequency is locked at 6. I just simply don't get it. So, okay, this is where I'm just gonna have to stop. And I know that I have to go this route if I want to have a chance of even getting in the top 10 or the top 20 even, I think. But I don't know where my inefficiencies are here. Because what I'm gonna do to end this video right now is I'm gonna leave this score up here of a 37,377. I'm gonna pop this GPU off right now and I'm gonna throw it on over there and run it so you can see that that's not the GPU, that's the system doing that. Yeah, 2,400 points-ish difference. You see that one has an average FPS of 173.04 and this one's at 183.96. I told you there was a 10 FPS difference. I could see it, I could feel it. But check this out. I mean, this CPU's is locked at 5.3 across the board. GPU frequency drops all the way down to the 2900s. So that one being a much higher GPU frequency, giving us a lower score, tells us the GPU is not fully utilized. Which sounds like counterintuitive, like counterproductive to have a high frequency, but it can go that high in the frequency because the cores are not doing difficult math because they're held back. Each frame is taking longer for the CPU to process, which is why they can keep the clock speed up longer or higher on the GPU. So this is just driving me absolutely insane. GPU temp should be around 58, 58.83. So it's been so consistent. CPU temp in the 40s the entire time. All right, well, that's where we're gonna end it. I would say help, but I get some of the most non-helpful emails. Like somebody actually wrote me an email explaining how to move the voltage slider. Oh my God, look at this setting right here. Look at this. Why is it? That's it. This affects everybody.